Welcome to the Wealth Stream podcast. The team at HighTower Great Lakes share their insights and passions for empowering their clients to live their best life. In this energetic podcast, we will take you on a journey to help you navigate your financial future, overcome life's challenges to reach your financial goals, and find the financial clarity you've been searching for. Let's explore the downstream impact of your wealth and what it means to you, your family, and your community to live greater.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Stream with Tim Scannell from HighTower Great Lakes. Good morning, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. I heard you are fresh off of a bit of a vacation.
Yeah, so we had written checks to universities around the country for 14 years for our 5 kids, and I wrote my last one in May. And my wife and I decided to take one semester and just go on a vacation, so we did. And I just got back and, ready to go.
All right, ready to go. So what are we talking about today?
Today I want to talk about 4 ways that the super rich manage their wealth. And, if you have read, and I think you probably have, a lot of people have, the Millionaire Next Door. Most of our clients who are wealthy don't consider themselves super rich, but there's a lot of lessons that the super rich that we can learn from them. But what I mean by super rich is generally it's somebody with $500 million or more. And those are none of our clients, but we do a lot of research to find out what they're doing to see if we can translate some of those strategies to our clients. So I want to talk about 4 primary things that they're doing that I think people can benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, if you look for wisdom, you want to look for people that are successful, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. So the super rich have been successful one way or another, whether they built it themselves or the family has been able to maintain it over a couple generations. There are successes in there, and there's bits of wisdom in there that you're gleaning, obviously. So where do we start with this today?
So just to address your point, I think that certainly some of the super rich have more complicated situations sometimes, but generally they're applying the same tools and strategies. It's just that they have more processes and they do it more as a process, I should say. They do it more often, and as a result, they have a little more success at it. So I want to try and help our clients use these tools also. But before, I guess I talked about the strategies, I thought it would be helpful to really just quickly go through what we call the 5 primary concerns that our clients have. And the reason is that these strategies are really meant to address concerns, address issues and problems, and see if we can find solutions. And, like one of the things I find when I'm talking to attorneys, CPAs, referrals that come to us, is that oftentimes advisors, they will lead with a product or lead with a strategy, and hey, I have this solution, without ever really talking to the client about, what their needs are. So I wanted to just briefly go through what we call the 5 primary concerns, just to give you a feel for what we're trying to address when we talk about these strategies. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the number one concern that most clients, most people we meet have is wealth preservation. And that's, the primary goal there is to earn the best possible rate of return, right? And that's just something we call the table stakes or the meat and potatoes. And I think that's what most advisors certainly try to do, is provide the best rate of return. And the key there is we're trying to really help them, grow their wealth and support their goals, their lifestyle. And I'll just give you just a quick story. When I was on my vacation, I was actually for a short period in Ireland, and I actually got a couple calls because there's been so much volatility in the market, and I called a few back from there. And what I find is that people hate losing money more than they like making money sometimes, or typically I should say. So wealth preservation, I think, is one of the 5 primary, the first of the primary concerns that we're trying to address, making sure we're helping people get the best possible rate of return, but within their risk tolerance and based on how much volatility they're willing to accept.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then the second area, or the primary concern we focus on, is wealth enhancement. And what we're trying to do there, our primary goal is really to minimize the impact that taxes have on their income, their rates of return, and their cash flow. So but clients are most concerned about rate of return because it generates the cash flow they need to maintain their standard of living. And taxes are a big part of that. So, we have processes we've created. As a team, we continually go to continuing ed throughout the year. We attend classes to keep up on the current laws and the current strategies. And getting back to our team, we always want to make sure that we have the most certified processes, so we're tax managing client situations. For example, I was just referred to a client recently, or they're becoming a client now, I should say. In this case, the client was 98% in equities. She's elderly, just way too aggressive. And I think she thought that she was more conservative than she was. But when we talked to her about the risk level, we decided, okay, we need to lower it. But the issue was really, there was a lot of built-up gains. How do we do that in the most tax-advantaged way? So in order to protect her wealth, protect the value of her portfolios, we wanted to reduce the risk, but we also needed to focus on wealth enhancement, which is basically minimizing taxes and making sure she nets or keeps after tax as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And then the third primary concern that clients have is wealth transfer. So we've hopefully preserved their wealth. We've hopefully minimized taxes, but now their other concern is, as we're looking to pass this on to the heirs, how can we do it in the most cost-effective way? And this really requires that, as an advisor, we have a very deep understanding of their family, who they want to benefit, the dynamics within the family, where things are, the estate laws, et cetera. And then the next area is wealth protection. So this really focuses on making sure that everything's properly owned and structured. A client wants to make sure that in the event of a lawsuit, in the event of maybe legal vulnerabilities that they have through their businesses, that they're protected. Recently I had worked with a client whose mother passed. They owned a cottage up in northern Michigan, and the issue was there's two daughters looking to inherit it, and they rent it sometimes. And we just got into a conversation about the fact that, if you're not going to use the condo or the cottage, are you willing to accept a liability if your sister's renting it, and how is it going to be owned, and how do we limit, lawsuits? So there's just a lot of legal and wealth or asset protection issues that we always try to focus on, and that's what we call wealth protection. Mm-hmm. And then the final area or final primary concerns that clients talk to us about are really charitable giving. So when we're meeting with a client and talking to them about how they want to give during their life or pass assets during their death to their favorite charities, we work with them to make sure that it's the most impactful. And just an example is the laws completely changed based on the tax laws this year. A lot of clients are no longer able to deduct some of the charitable contributions they're making because of the itemized deductions and the limitations in the tax law. So where we're doing a lot of work, for example, setting up donor-advised funds or charitable trusts to make sure we're maximizing the deduction or the tax deductibility of some of these gifts, and also making sure that these gifts then become more impactful. So they're really making the maximum, getting the maximum return to the charity for the gifts that they're making.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to briefly go through what I call the 5 concerns. Because when I talk about some of the strategies, what we're really trying to do is address those concerns and solve the issues related to that for our clients. So if it's okay, I'll just kind of get into the 4 key things. Yeah,
please.
Great. So the number one thing we talk to clients and attorneys and centers of influence about is working with your what we call top experts. And it's not as if anyone says that he wakes up someday and says, "Hey, I want to work with an inferior attorney, or an inferior CPA," yeah, right? Yeah. No one says that. But as we all know, all you have to do is read. All you have to do is talk to friends. There's what I call pretenders. There's people out there in the marketplace that maybe say they're doing wealth management. They have the title as a wealth manager, but they're really leading with the product. They're looking to push a sale of some sort of annuity, life insurance, or investment. Mm-hmm. There's also, we run across, sometimes people work with family members or other people that are well-meaning, but they just don't have maybe the expertise or the skill sets. And of course, you run across the exploiters or the predators like the Bernie Madoffs of the world. And, so the question becomes, how do you avoid, or how do maybe the super rich avoid working with some of those people versus getting what they would call like top of the line experts? And surveys, research, our experience shows that really referrals from their friends, from other key attorneys, CPAs, et cetera, that's truly like the number one source of where people get their top of the line advisors in the super rich, world, I should say. And just as an example, when I moved here to Valparaiso, Indiana, I moved in 1998. So I worked in Chicago for 10 years out of college. I worked in this industry, but for lifestyle and for raising our kids, we wanted to kind of get out of the city and move to a smaller area. And so really I started in a town, in a neighborhood, a whole town, but where I didn't really know anybody. But I can go back to 3 people that I met, and all of our clients in some way or another have come from those 3 people. So all of our clients have really been referrals, just by hopefully doing a good job, doing what's right, working with their attorneys, their team, and then you get the referrals from them.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I guess, working with top of line experts is the number one thing that when we read the difference between the super rich and how they get there and how they maintain it, they work through their network of attorneys, CPAs, they work through their network of friends, and they get initially referrals that they can then, talk to and research and survey, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then the number 2 area that, from what we find the super rich are doing is when they work with advisors, whether they're trust attorneys, CPAs, bankers, et cetera, insurance specialists, they work with advisors that focus on what we call the human element. And that may seem obvious. Obviously, Eric, when you meet with whoever, a CPA or attorney, you're hoping that they take your personal interest in consideration when they make the recommendations.
Yeah, you'd hope so, right?
You do. You make the assumption. But generally, we find that that's not always the case. And I could give you some examples of, just people who have been referred to us who have set up. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. I just said please do, because that's exactly what we need to know is give us some examples of what that looks like. Okay,
so when we meet with a client, or initially with a prospect, but also when we meet, for quarterly, annuals, semi-annual meetings, we always try to go through a process to find out more than just where their assets are. We're looking for, number one, their values. What is important to money about you. So, Eric, if I met with you, I might just ask that direct question initially. What's important to you? And you can imagine, we've talked during the podcast a number of times that you're such an advocate of family, you're such an advocate of Boys Town and some of your charitable interests, that certainly what you value would be important for me to know if I was working as your advisor.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And then from there we talk about your goals. So, what would you like to achieve with your money? As I talked about, education was a big part of the goals for Nancy and myself. We wanted to make sure that at the very least, our 5 children left the house educated as much as we could, provide them with those opportunities. And then hopefully from there, they'll take that on. But education was a big part, but that's not the case for everybody. Everyone has a specific goals that they want to for their money. Mm-hmm. Relationships. So one of the things, just to get to the story about why the human elements involved, relationships are important because sometimes if you don't ask, you find out that you missed something that's critically important. We recently sent out a white paper to our clients about estate planning for pets. And
really, estate planning for pets?
I'll be honest, we're not pet owners and we're not pet people. I have a lot of clients who are. I was surprised by the positive response and the feedback and the questions that came because of that.
Really?
Yeah, because if you think about it, Eric, you've talked about the fact I think you have a dog, right? A Mastiff? Is that
I do. Yeah, Cooper, big bull Mastiff.
So, have you addressed the question, which, if something happened to you, something happened to your wife, who's going to take care of them, right? So that's really something that never occurred to me. We sent out this white paper, but it was very, very important for a number of people.
Wow. I know I've heard of people leave. We all heard those stories where somebody leaves $500 million to a cat, right? I mean, that's the that's the big story. Is like, oh, okay, I think there's actually been movies about it as well, where somebody, the cat gets all this money, and now this person's taking care of a cat, and they live in this mansion with 40 bedrooms or whatever, and it's just a cat and the caretaker. Is that what you're talking about? Or are we talking about just like well, my dog? Hey, here's I'm setting some money aside just to make sure that he's taken care of, just in case, but it's not 500 million. It's like 10, 20 grand. Make sure he's got all the medical things he needs and all the food he could possibly want. And then beyond that, that's it.
Well, that's part of it. It's also, like my son Kevin just graduated from DePaul University, and he moved off to New York, and he had a cat. Mm-hmm. So he's like, what do you do with the cat? And then if somebody takes the cat, certainly it's going to cost money to support the cat. Mm-hmm. So it's part of it is, I know it sounds, it might be out of the box thinking, but it's just an example of, okay, if I did pass away and Nancy was gone too, who would take the dog? And then if they're going to take the dog, we certainly want to provide them with some funds to, pay for it, right?
Yep.
You don't want to create a burden for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then beyond relationships, goals, and values, we need to get information about what their interests are. We talked about vacations. What's your ideal vacation? What do you read? I want to make sure I understand what's important to them. A big one is what we call process. Process just means how involved do you want to be in the management of your finances? I think we talked in one of the previous podcasts about different money or high net worth personalities, and I run across gamblers. People who come and there's like, I just want to take risk. I just want to. We call it gambling. They don't consider it themselves gambling, but without a process, it is. And so I want to know if that's what they think. I want to know how active they want to be in the management of their money. I have a client that I meet with every month. I have clients who say, I'd like to meet once a year. I just got a new client who said, no offense, Tim, I never want to meet you, but I want you to call me, and I'd love to do Zoom meetings, right? Yeah. So I want to know that because I want to make sure I'm delivering in a way that fits their personality and fits what they want.
Yeah. That's great. Was it Howie Mandel by chance? Because
No, but like Eric, so how do you like to work with your advisors? I mean, just as an example.
Well, pretty much all of my advisors, all the people that I work with are all over the country. So yeah, it's Zoom, or it's going to be Skype, or it's going to be something like that. If I had somebody locally that I worked with, I think it'd be great to be able to meet every once in a while. But yeah.
Yeah. And then part of that is we'll then talk about what other advisors do they have. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things we do that I think differentiates our planning process is we really want to get involved with their team. We really want to work with their attorney, CPA, insurance agent, trust officer, banker, et cetera. So it's just nice to know how they currently work with them, or if they even have them. If they don't have them, maybe we can help them add to that team.
Yes, absolutely. And Tim, you've spoken about that multiple times on previous podcasts, and there's a couple podcasts out there that I would love for you to link. If you can dig those up in the description for this podcast, maybe, because I think people need to go back and understand exactly what you're talking about there. And really, you are talking about huge relationship development with their entire team so that it's all put together and everybody's on the same page. And that is so vitally important. And that those podcasts really covered that. So I'd love for anybody who's listening to this to be able to have an easy link to those past podcasts.
That's a great idea. I'll make sure that we do that.
Awesome.
Because the relationship management part is not just, how are you going to work with our team? Who on our team is going to be the specialist? I'll be the lead, but what other support you need? But then also, how are we going to work with your team, your attorneys, et cetera? Mm-hmm. So we've gone, we talk about their values, goals, relationships, interests, what process, and then finally we get to assets. So the point of this whole ramble is that you want to make sure that your experts, whoever you're working with, are focused on the human element. Certainly their assets, what do you have, how much do you make, what are your goals, are critical. But those other parts that we talked about are just as important, and they frame the whole plan. They frame the whole conversation. Mm-hmm. So we've talked a little bit, about the first two items, basically working with the best experts possible, using your referral network to do that, making sure that they're focused on you as a person. The third part is what we call, what I'd say is just making sure that you understand what you're agreeing to. And again, these are all things you read and you might say, well, that's obvious, right? But who reads all the fine print?
Exactly.
Who goes through the volume of paper that we're required to provide? They told me 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago that my industry is going paperless, and I have more paper now, and, and I'm probably 100 times that up in the cloud somewhere. But the reality is, you just have to make sure, and what the super rich do is they, according to surveys anyway, is they understand the limitations, the benefits, the implications of some of the legal structures. And I'll just give you an example. There's a good friend of mine that I've known for 15 years. He's in the hotel business, very successful. And I was talking to him about some planning that he's doing with his advisor, and it just always seemed to lead or start with life insurance. And I think life insurance is a phenomenal tool, but it's one tool that's a solution to part of the plan.
Yeah.
And you don't lead with it. And so he just kept talking about leading as the solution for this and solution for that. And I just think that's an example of, making sure you understand what you're agreeing to, because they're not liquid, they're long-term, they're 15 to 20 years out, and life changes quickly. So not that it's bad, it's not, it's good, but you just have to understand the limitations and the implications.
Of course. I mean, there's so many different types, and they work in so many different ways with all of your wealth planning. And you've talked about that on past podcasts as well. It is one tool in a large toolbox of many tools.
Yeah, and we just picked up a recent client who had worked with a firm where they had a strategy that they implemented. And when we did our what we call risk-alize assessment, we assessed the level of risk they're taking, and this client is retired. It was higher than just 100% in the S&P 500. It was really high risk, and The reason was there was this one strategy that the firm was implementing, and the client just wasn't aware of it. Mm-hmm. So, at the very least, we said, roll out of that to reduce your risk. It was a series of options and things like that. But the point is, make sure you understand what you're agreeing to, and you don't have to be an expert, but be persistent and willing to challenge and ask for additional detail.
Yeah, absolutely. That's your right, right? I mean, that's all there is to it. That is your right. The people that you're working with, you need to be bold enough to be able to say, I need you to explain it to me again, or I need you to send me all the paperwork so I can review it, or I need them to. I know the super rich. One thing they're going to have is a wonderful attorney, a great attorney that they probably pay quite a bit of money to, and they can say, send it all to them, and I'm not going to make a move until my attorney reviews everything, because I mean that's what needs to be done so many times.
Exactly, and you're exactly right. And not everyone has that, but you might have a CPA or a friend or a spouse or somebody. Just don't be hesitant to ask.
Absolutely.
And that gets to the final thing that research tells us that the super wealthy do, which is trust but verify. And you could probably remember that from Ronald Reagan when he talked about Russia. We trust but verify. And that gets to what we just talked about a little bit also, which is if you're unsure, you're uncomfortable, you've got that gut feel about anything that's being proposed, look to verify. And one of the things that we do for our clients is we offer what we call a stress test or a second opinion service to people, their friends, their people that they know and trust. And really all that does is what you can imagine that, stress testing does. It takes a look at your plan, and it runs it through a series of stress tests to make sure that on the estate planning side, tax planning, et cetera, that it can survive, any sort of circumstance that might occur. People always ask me, are you bullish? Are you, negative about the market, about the economy? And I always say, I'm not, we have leanings, but more importantly, we're prepared to respond either way because we've done this stress testing for people and we know how the plans are going to go depending on which way the markets, the economies, the tax laws, et cetera, go.
And I'll tell you something, Tim, that is so vitally important. I've worked with advisors for a very, very long time, and I rarely hear of someone going through that and doing stress testing. And it's so funny that when you say stress testing, the first thing that comes to mind is Boeing, the airplane manufacturer. My dad worked for them for years, and I've seen a couple of videos where they stress test their wings, meaning they will bend them until they just absolutely obliterate, right? They'll bend it so they know, because they have to know what kind of endurance this has. How is it going to hold up when turbulence is there, right? The wings flex, all wings flex on a plane, and they bend it until it just basically shatters or crumples. I mean, it's amazing video to see. And that's what I love about what you do with that, because if you don't know where that tolerance is, if you don't know what the turbulence is going to do within that plan, you're blind. You're flying blind, in my opinion. So I think it's wonderful that you do that, and I'm sure that your clients really appreciate it, because that's something they need to know.
Yeah, and this area, trust but verify or stress testing, this is really the number one thing, the top thing, I should say, or most important thing that the super rich do that maybe other people don't, and that they do it more often. You create a plan, and I'll talk to people, and they say, yeah, I put this plan together in my 401k and my estate plan, 15 years ago, and haven't done anything with it.
Yeah.
And life is different, right? So you just need to get that second opinion. You need to do the stress test more often, and that's really what we do for our clients.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've covered the 4 things. What else do we need to know about the super rich?
Well, that's really what I wanted to cover today, because I have to save some information for the next podcast.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But basically, I really do think that this is a valuable one, because if people can apply these 4 lessons, I really think it'll have a tremendous impact. It'll really add value to whatever their goals and plans are.
Yeah.
And so I was excited to do this one.
Tim, if people are listening to this and saying, okay, I really like this content, I like the 4 things, maybe they're interested in that stress testing that you're talking about, how do they reach out and get a hold of you so they can have that conversation with you?
Well, at the very least, they can go to our website. It's HighTower Great Lakes, and they can download and access a lot of resources. I think if they want to take the next step and maybe have a stress test done or a second opinion, they can always contact me, Scannell at HighTowerAdvisors.com, or my direct line is 219-246-5370.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time today, Tim.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you for listening to the WealthStream Podcast with Tim Scannell. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Tim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And if you've got friends and family that are super, super rich, give this to them. Share it with them, because I'd love for them to say, hey, wait a second, I have a lot of those things in place, but I really need to talk to Tim, and then we can get Tim some, multi-billion-dollar clients. That would be fantastic.
Yeah,
but
tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah, anytime, really, but tomorrow would be great. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at HighTower Great Lakes, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the WealthStream Podcast. We hope you gained some valuable insight that you can apply to your life and share with others. Please don't forget to subscribe below to be notified when new episodes become available. And don't forget to live greater. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of HighTower Great Lakes. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. HighTower Great Lakes is a group of investment professionals registered with HighTower Securities LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with HighTower Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through HighTower Securities LLC. Advisory services are offered through HighTower Advisors LLC.